He mocked her in front of every camera. "If you win this match, I'll marry you." The whole world laughed at the curvy woman who dared to accept, but nobody knew what she was hiding, or that this mafia boss's cruel little joke would tear his entire empire apart. What happens on championship night left everyone speechless. The lights inside the downtown Chicago sports arena were almost too bright, bouncing off the polished floor and the rows of cameras lined up near the stage. Hundreds of people had crammed into the registration hall for the opening press event of the year's biggest amateur combat sports tournament. The air buzzed with nervous energy, the kind that comes when money, fame, and pride all sit in the same room. At the center of it all stood Marcus Kane. He was the kind of man who walked like he owned the floor beneath everyone's feet. Tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, the crowd's full attention, and he knew it. Reporters hung on every word as he talked about prize money, prestige, and what he called the standard of excellence his event demanded.
That probably cost more than most people's cars.
As the famous sponsor of the tournament, he had, near the back of the room, Ava Mitchell wasn't impressed. She had come for one reason only, her younger brother, Ethan. He stood beside her in his training jacket, bouncing on his heels, eyes wide with the excitement of a young fighter about to chase his dream. Ava, in a deep blue blouse and dark jeans, kept a steady hand on his shoulder. She was a plus-size woman who carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need a spotlight to feel sure of itself. Then Marcus started taking questions, and his tone shifted. A young competitor asked about support for first-time fighters. Marcus laughed and waved the question off. "This isn't a charity," he said. "This tournament is for people who belong here. Not everyone does." A few people chuckled. Ava's jaw tightened. "Some of us train for years just to afford the entry fee," Ethan muttered under his breath. That was enough. Ava raised her voice across the room. "Maybe if you treated the fighters with a little respect, more of them would actually want to be here." The hall went quiet. Heads turned. Cameras swung toward her like a wave. Marcus shielded his eyes against the lights and found her. A slow, amused smile crossed his face as he looked her up and down. "And who are you, exactly? A coach? A manager?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Or just someone who wandered in from the food court?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ava felt her brother stiffen beside her, but she didn't flinch. "I'm someone who knows the difference between confidence and arrogance," she said. "You've got plenty of one and none of the other." The crowd's reaction shifted. A few oohs mixed with the laughter now. Marcus tilted his head, enjoying the challenge more than he should have. "Tell you what," he said, spreading his arms wide for the cameras. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. So here's a deal." He grinned. "If you win this tournament, if you, of all people, walk out of here as champion, I'll marry you." The room exploded with laughter. Someone whistled. Phones lifted into the air, recording every second. Marcus clearly expected her to shrink, to laugh it off, to disappear back into the crowd. She didn't. Ava stepped forward, slow and calm, until the cameras found her fully. The laughter began to fade as people realized she wasn't backing down. "Is that a promise?" she asked. "In front of everyone? On camera?" Marcus's grin flickered, just for a second. "Of course," he said, recovering fast. "I'm a man of my word." "Good." Ava looked directly into the nearest camera. "Then I accept." For a moment, nobody moved. Marcus blinked. "You... what?" "I accept your challenge," Ava repeated, louder now, her voice steady and clear. "I'll enter your tournament, and when I win, you'll keep your promise in front of all these same people." The hall erupted. Gasps, laughter, shouting, 100 conversations starting at once. Reporters shoved forward. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Ava, what are you doing?" he whispered. She gave him a quick, calm look. "Trust me." Marcus tried to laugh it off, but the cameras had already caught the surprise on his face. "This is just a bit of fun," he said. "Nobody's actually—" "You said it on camera," Ava cut in. "We all heard you. So unless you'd like to take it back right now, in front of everyone, I'll see you in the tournament." A challenge thrown back in his own arena. Marcus Kane, the man who controlled every room he walked into, suddenly looked like he'd lost his footing. His handlers leaned in, whispering. The reporters were practically climbing over each other. "Fine," Marcus said at last, forcing the grin back onto his face. "Enter. Sign up. Let's see how far you get." He leaned toward the microphone. "But don't say I didn't warn you." "I'll remember you said that," Ava replied. She turned and walked toward the exit, her head high, Ethan hurrying behind her. Behind them, the room was chaos. Within the hour, the clip would be everywhere. Shared, replayed, argued over. Mafia of the fight world humiliated by a stranger. The comments would explode. Some would mock her, some would cheer. Most would assume she'd never last a single round. Outside, in the cool evening air, Ethan finally caught up to her. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he said, half panicked, half amazed. Ava let out a slow breath, the calm finally giving way to a flicker of something underneath, something fierce and long buried. "More than you know," she said quietly, staring back at the glowing arena. "More than he knows." Because Marcus Kane had no idea who he'd just challenged, and Ava Mitchell hadn't told anyone the whole truth about her past, not even her brother. Not yet. The community recreation center in the Chicago suburbs smelled like rubber mats and old coffee. Saturday morning light came through the high windows, falling across the worn training floor where Ethan usually spent his weekends. But today he wasn't training. He sat on a bench with an ice pack pressed to his shoulder, his face tight with frustration. Ava crouched in front of him, checking the swelling. "How bad?" "It's nothing," he muttered. "Ethan," he sighed. "The physio says I tweaked something, nothing serious, but I can't compete, not this week." His voice cracked on the last word. He'd trained 8 months for this tournament. He'd saved every dollar for the entry fee, and now, with one bad landing during a sparring drill, it was gone. Ava sat beside him quietly. She knew what this meant to him. Their parents had passed years ago, and she'd practically raised him since he was a teenager. Every late shift she'd worked, every dream she'd set aside, had been so he could chase his own. Watching that dream slip away hurt more than she let show. "There'll be other tournaments," she said gently. "Not with prize money like this, not sponsored like this." He shook his head. "I needed this one, Ava." She stared at the floor for a long moment, then something shifted in her expression. "What if you didn't lose your spot?" she said slowly. Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" "The registration is in your name. Transfers are allowed between family members. I read the rules last night." She turned to face him fully. "I'll take your place." He almost laughed, then stopped when he saw she was serious. "Ava, you can't be. You challenged Marcus Kane as a joke to put him in his place. You don't actually fight." A small, strange smile touched her lips. "Don't I? What's that supposed to mean?" She was quiet for a beat, choosing her words. "Ethan, there's something I never really told you about. Before Mom and Dad got sick, before I started working 3 jobs to keep us above water, I wrestled. In college. I was good." He blinked. "You did intramural stuff. You mentioned it once." "It wasn't intramural." She met his eyes. "I was on the national collegiate team. I placed at championships 2 years running. I had scholarship offers, a shot at going further." She paused. "Then everything fell apart at home, and I walked away from all of it. I never went back, and I never talked about it, because talking about it hurt too much." Ethan stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You were a national-level wrestler? And you never said anything? For years?" "It felt like a different life," she said quietly. "One I gave up on purpose. But the training never really leaves you. Your body remembers. Your mind remembers. She flexed her hands. I've kept up more than you think. Early mornings, when you were still asleep. He sat back, the ice pack forgotten. That's why you accepted his challenge. You weren't bluffing. I was angry, she admitted. But no, I wasn't bluffing. I knew I could actually do it. I just didn't expect to say it out loud in front of 100 cameras. She let out a short laugh. That part surprised even me. Ethan was quiet, processing. Then a slow grin spread across his face. If anyone can wipe that smug look off Kane's face, it's you. So you're okay with me taking your spot? Okay with it? He laughed. Ava, I want a front row seat. The transfer paperwork went through that afternoon at the tournament's registration office downtown. The clerk behind the desk did a double take when she saw the name change request, then glanced up at Ava with a flicker of recognition. The viral clip had clearly made the rounds here, too. You're really entering, the clerk said, more statement than question. I really am. Word reached Marcus Kane within the hour. He stood in his glass-walled office overlooking the city, watching the clip play for what must have been the 10th time on his assistant's tablet. The woman from the press event, the one who'd called his arrogance to his face, now officially registered as a competitor. His assistant, a nervous young man named Trevor, hovered nearby. Sir, the office is getting flooded with media requests. Everyone wants to know if the challenge is real, if you'll actually, you know. Marry her, Marcus snorted. She'll be out in the first round, probably the first 30 seconds. Then this whole thing dies down and we get back to a real tournament. And if she isn't out in the first round? Marcus turned, frowning. She's a stranger off the street, Trevor. A woman who got brave at a press event. She has no record, no ranking, no training history we can find. He waved a hand. Let her enter. Let the cameras follow her. The story sells tickets. We'll let the tournament handle the rest. But even as he said it, something nagged at him. The way she'd walked toward the cameras, the steadiness in her voice. People who were bluffing didn't move like that. People who were bluffing looked for the exit. She'd looked for him. Pull whatever you can find on her, Marcus said finally. Ava Mitchell, background, history, everything. Already tried, sir. There's almost nothing, like she scrubbed her own past. Marcus's frown deepened, or someone scrubbed it for her. He glanced back at the frozen image on the tablet, Ava's calm, fierce face mid-sentence. Interesting, he murmured. That evening, in the recreation center, Ava stood alone on the empty training floor long after Ethan had gone home. She wrapped her hands slowly, deliberately, the old motions returning like a language she'd never truly forgotten. For the first time in years, she felt the pull of the mat again. And she wasn't only thinking about the tournament. She was thinking about her father, and a question she'd never been able to answer. The converted warehouse on the city's west side didn't look like much from the outside. Brick walls, a faded loading sign, a line of cars stretching down the block. But inside, the tournament organizers had built a proper arena. Bright lights hung over a raised competition mat, and tiered seating climbed up on all four sides, packed with fans who'd come hoping to see exactly one thing: the woman from the viral clip get knocked out fast. Ava felt every pair of eyes on her as she walked toward the warm-up area. Whispers followed her. Someone laughed. A man near the front leaned over to his friend and said, loud enough to carry, $20 says she taps in under a minute. She kept her face still and her steps even. Ethan trailed beside her, carrying her gear bag, his injured arm in a light sling. Don't listen to them, he said quietly. I'm not. And she wasn't. The noise didn't reach her the way it once might have. Years of working impossible hours, of carrying a family on her back, of being underestimated in 100 different rooms. It had built something in her that crowds couldn't shake. High above the floor, Marcus Kane watched from a private box behind tinted glass. Trevor stood beside him with the tablet. First match is up, sir. She's drawn against Devon Cole. Decent amateur, fast. He's been training for 2 years. Marcus swirled the drink in his hand. Then it'll be quick. He almost meant it as a kindness. Quick would be less embarrassing for her. Ava stepped onto the mat. Devon Cole was younger, taller, and clearly confident. He bounced on his toes, grinning at the crowd, playing up the moment. He didn't even look worried. To him, this was a free win and a viral highlight reel. The referee brought them to the center. Devon smirked down at her. Try not to make this too easy. Ava said nothing. She just lowered into her stance. And in that single movement, everything about her changed. Her weight settled. Her hands came up in a way that wasn't wild or nervous, but precise. The stance of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The few people in the crowd who actually knew the sport went quiet. They recognized it, even if no one else did. The whistle blew. Devon lunged in fast, going for an early takedown to end the show. Ava shifted her hips, redirected his momentum, and let him stumble past her. The crowd gasped. He spun around, surprised, and came again, more careful this time. She controlled the tie-up, hand-fighting with quiet efficiency, never overcommitting, never wasting energy. Every time Devon pushed, she absorbed it. Every time he reached, she countered just enough to throw off his rhythm. She wasn't trying to overpower him. She was reading him. Then she saw her opening. Devon overextended on a grab. In one smooth motion, Ava dropped her level, swept his lead leg, and drove forward. He went down hard onto his back, the breath leaving him in a rush. Before he could react, she'd already secured control, pinning his shoulders to the mat with textbook positioning. The referee slapped the floor. The match was over. For a moment, the entire warehouse fell silent. Then the noise came all at once, not laughter this time, but shock. Stunned applause broke out in scattered pockets and spread fast. The man who'd bet $20 sat with his mouth open. Ava rose to her feet, calm as ever, and offered Devon a hand up. He took it, dazed. "How?" he started. "Good match," she said simply, and walked off the mat. In the private box, Marcus had set his drink down somewhere during the match. He hadn't noticed when. Trevor stared at the screen. "That wasn't luck, sir. That was... I don't even know what that was. She didn't waste a single motion." Marcus didn't answer right away. He'd watched thousands of fights. He knew the difference between someone who got lucky and someone who knew exactly what they were doing. What he'd just seen wasn't a beginner getting brave. It was a trained competitor who had buried her skill so deep that no one had thought to look for it. "Pull her record again," he said. "Go back further this time. School athletics, college, anything." "I told you, sir, there's almost nothing online." "Then call someone who keeps the old paper files." Marcus's eyes stayed fixed on the floor, where Ava was now talking quietly with her brother. Nobody moves like that without years behind it. She didn't come out of nowhere. She came back from somewhere. Trevor hesitated. "You think she's hiding something?" Marcus watched Ava laugh at something Ethan said, the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. It vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same steady focus when she caught sight of his box and looked straight up at the tinted glass, as if she knew exactly where he was sitting. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that I made a promise to someone I completely misjudged." Down on the floor, Ethan was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see their faces? Did you see them? That guy thought he was going to embarrass you on camera." Ava unwrapped her hands, her movements still calm, but her heart was beating harder than the match alone could explain. It wasn't the win. It was the feeling that had come rushing back the moment she'd stepped onto the mat. The certainty, the focus, the part of herself she'd locked away for so long. "One round down," she said. "One round down," Ethan echoed, grinning. Then his face turned more serious. "Marcus is watching you differently now. You realize that, right? You stopped being a joke to him the second that whistle blew." Ava looked up at the tinted glass one more time before turning to gather her things. "Good," she said, "because I'm not here for the joke. I'm here for something he doesn't even know he's connected to yet. Ethan tilted his head. What does that mean? She slung her bag over her shoulder. I'll explain in Milwaukee. The drive to Milwaukee took just under 2 hours. Ethan dozed in the passenger seat for most of it, his slinged arm tucked against his chest, while Ava kept her eyes on the highway and her thoughts somewhere far behind her. The tournament had moved north for its next stage, with matches scheduled to resume the following day. That gave Ava one free afternoon, and there was someone in Milwaukee she'd been meaning to visit for a very long time. His name was Harold Vance. Harold had worked alongside her father back when Daniel Mitchell ran a small but respected sports training business. Ava remembered Harold from her childhood, a kind, gray-haired man who used to slip her caramel candies during her father's late meetings. He'd retired years ago to a quiet house on the edge of the city, and when Ava had called ahead, his voice had cracked with emotion at the sound of her name. She left Ethan resting at the hotel and went alone. Harold's house was small and warm, full of old trophies and framed photographs. He answered the door slowly, leaning on a cane, and his eyes went soft the moment he saw her. "Little Ava," he breathed. "My goodness, you're the spitting image of your father." She hugged him carefully. "It's been too long, Harold." He made tea with shaking hands, and they sat in his cluttered living room, surrounded by memories. For a while, they only talked about the easy things, her brother, the years gone by, the life she'd built. But eventually, Harold's gaze drifted to a photograph on the mantel. Her father, young and smiling, standing in front of a gym with his name above the door. "You didn't drive all this way just to see an old man," Harold said gently. "You want to talk about Daniel." Ava set down her cup. "I need to understand what happened to his business, Harold. All I ever knew was that it collapsed. Dad never explained. He just changed after that, got quiet, stopped fighting for things. And then he got sick, and there was never time to ask." Harold's face tightened with old grief. He was silent for a long moment. "Your father built something good," he finally said. "A real place for athletes who couldn't afford the fancy programs. It was working, it was growing." He paused. And then, almost overnight, it fell apart. Contracts that should have been solid disappeared. Money that should have been there was gone. Investors pulled out, claiming he'd mismanaged everything. And had he? No. Harold's voice hardened. Daniel never mismanaged $1 in his life. Somebody manipulated the records, forged signatures, rewrote contracts, moved money in ways that made it all look like his fault. By the time anyone could prove otherwise, the damage was done. The business was finished, and so was his reputation. Ava's hands had gone cold. "Someone did it on purpose." "Someone with access," Harold said. "Someone he trusted. But your father could never prove who. He spent years trying, then gave up to protect what was left of his health and his family." He looked at her sadly. "He didn't want you carrying that weight, Ava. That's why he never told you." She sat very still, the pieces of her childhood rearranging themselves in her mind. The sudden move to a smaller house, her father's quiet despair, the reason she'd had to drop everything, including wrestling, to keep the family afloat. It hadn't been bad luck. It had been someone's choice. "Do you have any names?" she asked. "Anyone who was involved?" Harold pushed himself up and shuffled to an old filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a worn folder, thick with yellowed papers, and handed it to her. "I kept everything I could. I always hoped someone would finish what your father couldn't." Ava opened the folder. Inside were copies of contracts, financial statements, and a list of business associates from that time. Names, signatures, company letterheads. Her eyes scanned down the page. Then she stopped. One name jumped out at her, a company logo she recognized. Not from her father's past, from her present. It was a firm that now operated under the umbrella of a much larger organization, one she'd been studying obsessively for the past week. Marcus Kane's organization. Her breath caught. She flipped through more pages, heart racing. 2 more names. both connected to people who, according to everything she'd researched, currently held senior positions in Marcus's company.
Harold,
She said slowly, looking up.
some of these people, they work for Marcus Kane now.
Harold blinked. The fight promoter? The one all over the news with the marriage challenge? His eyes widened as understanding dawned. Ava, that's the tournament you entered.
Yes.
You think it's a coincidence? She closed the folder, her mind moving fast.
I entered to put a loud, arrogant man in his place. That's all it was. But now,
She trailed off.
now I'm walking straight into a room full of the people who might have destroyed my father.
Harold reached over and gripped her hand.
Be careful, little Ava. These aren't men who like being seen. If they buried the truth once, they'll do it again.
She drove back to the hotel as the sun set over the highway, the folder sitting on the passenger seat like a live thing. Everything had changed. The tournament was no longer just a challenge or a chance to prove herself. It was a door, one that led directly to the answers her father had searched for until the day he died. When she got back to the room, Ethan was awake, eating takeout in front of the TV.
How is your friend? He asked.
Ava set the folder down on the table between them.
Ethan, she said quietly, I need to tell you something about Dad, and about why I think we ended up in this tournament for a reason none of us expected.
He put down his food slowly.
You're scaring me. Good, she said, because someone should have been scared a long time ago.
The Lake Geneva Training Resort sat on the edge of a wide blue lake, surrounded by tall pines and quiet walking trails. The tournament organizers had booked it for the contestants, a few days of rest, conditioning, and preparation before the quarterfinals. For most fighters, it was a chance to recover and train in peace. For Ava, it was a chance to get closer to the truth. She spent her mornings in the gym, drilling and sparring, keeping her body sharp. But her evenings belonged to the folder Harold had given her. In her room, with the lake glittering outside the window, she spread the old documents across the bed and cross-referenced them against everything she could find about Marcus's organization. Names, dates, company structures. Slowly, a picture was forming, but it was incomplete, like a photograph with the most important part torn away. She needed access she didn't have. And then, on the second evening, access came looking for her. She was sitting at a corner table in the resort's quiet lounge, a notebook open in front of her, when a shadow fell across the page. "You're not training," Marcus said. Ava looked up. He stood there in casual clothes, no cameras, no handlers, just him. It was the first time she'd seen him without the armor of a crowd around him.
I train enough, she said, closing her notebook. What do you want?
He pulled out the chair across from her without asking and sat. I've been watching you. I noticed. The tinted glass isn't as subtle as you think. A flicker of a smile. Not just in the arena. He set a tablet on the table and turned it toward her. On the screen was a digitized copy of an old document, one of the same contracts she'd been studying for days. I've been doing some research of my own, about my own company, and I keep finding things that don't add up. Ava kept her face still, though her heart had jumped. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been researching the same things. He leaned forward. Don't bother denying it. My people flagged the records you've been pulling. Old business filings, company histories, names connected to my senior associates. His eyes searched hers. You're not just here to win a tournament, are you? She studied him for a long moment, weighing how much to give away. No, she finally said. I'm not. Marcus sat back, something shifting in his expression. I thought so. He paused. Here's what I've figured out on my end. For years, I trusted the people who built my organization with me. Some of them came from older companies, brought their own connections, their own deals. I never questioned it. Why would I? His jaw tightened. But over the past week, I've started pulling threads, and some of those threads lead to things that were hidden from me. Money moved without my knowledge, records altered before I ever saw them, people in my own circle keeping secrets. You sound surprised, Ava said. Men like you usually assume everyone around them is loyal. Men like me, Marcus repeated, with a dry, humorless laugh. You really don't think much of me. Should I? You called me a food court wanderer in front of 100 cameras. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was, he exhaled. That was the kind of thing I say without thinking. I've gotten used to people laughing along. He met her eyes. You didn't laugh. You made me look like a fool. And then you walked onto that mat and proved you weren't one. Ava said nothing. Marcus tapped the tablet. I'll be straight with you. I don't know exactly what you're looking for, but I think we're chasing the same lie from different directions. You have old records I can't get to. I have access to the inside of an organization you can't touch. He spread his hands. Separately, neither of us gets the whole picture. Together, we might. She narrowed her eyes. And why would you turn on your own people? Because if someone has been lying to me for years, Marcus said, his voice low and serious, I want to know who. I built my name on being the man who's always in control. If that's been a lie this whole time, I need the truth more than I need their loyalty. It was the most honest thing he'd said since she met him. Ava sat in silence, calculating. Trusting Marcus Kane went against every instinct she had. He was arrogant, careless with people, the kind of man her father would have warned her about. But he was right. Alone, she'd hit a wall. He had keys to doors she could never open on her own. If we do this, she said slowly, I need to know one thing first. The man at the center of all of this, the one who manipulated the records years ago. Do you know who he is? Marcus shook his head. Not yet, but I have a list of people who joined my organization around that time, people with the access to do what you're describing. He turned the tablet back toward himself, scrolled, and held it up. Recognize any of these? Ava looked at the names on the screen. 3 of them matched the folder in her room exactly. She kept her expression neutral, but inside, the ground shifted beneath her. Maybe, she said carefully. Maybe I do. Marcus studied her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he extended his hand across the table. A partnership, he said, just until we find the truth. After that, we go back to me being the arrogant promoter and you being the woman trying to win my tournament. Ava looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of her father, of the years of silence, of the weight he'd carried alone. She shook it. Just until we find the truth, she agreed. His grip was firm. Hers was firmer. One more thing, she added, releasing his hand. Whatever we find, when we find it, I decide how it comes out. Not you, not your cameras. Me. Marcus held her gaze, then nodded slowly. Deal. Neither of them noticed the man in the doorway of the lounge, watching them shake hands. A senior associate of Marcus's, his face carefully blank. He turned and walked away without a word. The Indianapolis Convention Center was the biggest venue yet. Thousands of seats wrapped around the central mat, and the energy in the building was electric. The viral story had only grown. What started as a joke had become the thing everyone was talking about. Cameras lined every angle. Reporters waited by the tunnels. Ava Mitchell was no longer the woman people expected to lose. She was the woman people came to see. She felt the weight of it as she walked toward the floor, but she didn't let it slow her. Ethan was at her side, his sling gone now, his arm healing well. Whole different crowd tonight, he murmured, scanning the stands. They're cheering for you. Some of them, Ava said.
The rest still want to see me fall. Then don't fall. She gave him a small smile. Wasn't planning on it.
Her quarterfinal opponent was a powerful, experienced competitor named Renee Walsh. No underestimating from this one. Renee had watched Ava's earlier matches and came in respectful and cautious. From the first whistle, it was clear this would be the hardest test yet. Renee was strong and patient, refusing to take risks. She pressured Ava, looking to wear her down, to drag the match into the late minutes where conditioning would decide everything. For the first time, Ava found herself genuinely challenged. Twice, Renee nearly secured control. Twice, Ava escaped by the narrowest margin, her training and instinct the only things keeping her in it. The crowd was on its feet. In the final minute, Ava saw it. The small habit Renee had repeated all match, a slight drop of her left shoulder before she committed to a grip. Ava waited. Renee dropped the shoulder, and Ava struck, slipping under the grip, hooking Renee's leg and turning her with a perfectly timed throw. She rode the momentum into control and held it as the clock ran down. The whistle blew. Ava had won. The convention center erupted. Even some of the people who'd come to see her lose found themselves on their feet. Renee, breathing hard, pulled Ava into a brief, respectful embrace. "You're the real thing," Renee said. "Whoever told you that you weren't was lying." Ava held the words close. They meant more than the win. But the night wasn't over. Marcus found her in a quiet corridor behind the floor, away from the cameras. His face was tense in a way she hadn't seen before. "I got us in," he said. "Into what?" "The archive. The old corporate records from when the original companies merged into mine. Most of it was supposed to be sealed away, gathering dust." He glanced down the empty hall. "I had a contact pull the physical files. The ones nobody bothered to digitize. The ones somebody clearly hoped would stay forgotten." Ava's pulse quickened. "And?" He handed her a thick envelope. "I haven't gone all the way through it, but I found something I think you need to see first." She opened it with careful hands. Inside were documents far older than anything in Harold's folder. Original contracts, internal memos, signed approvals from the years when her father's business collapsed. She read fast, her eyes scanning line after line. Then she found it, a memo, dated to the exact period her father lost everything. It authorized the transfer of certain contracts and assets away from Daniel Mitchell's company, contracts that had been quietly redirected through a series of shell arrangements before landing, years later, inside the foundation of Marcus's organization. And the memo was signed. Ava's eyes locked on the signature, then on the name printed neatly beneath it. She knew that name. So did Marcus. It belonged to one of the most trusted executives in his entire company, a man who currently helped manage his most important business ventures, a man Marcus had stood beside at countless events, had trusted with deals worth fortunes, had called a friend. "No," Marcus said quietly, reading over her shoulder. His face had gone pale. "That can't be right." "It's his signature," Ava said. "Compare it. It's the same one on a dozen of your current contracts." Marcus took the memo from her with unsteady hands. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. She watched something break behind his eyes, the realization that the betrayal hadn't come from a stranger or a rival, but from someone inside his own walls, someone he'd defended, someone he'd trusted completely. "He was there at the beginning," Marcus said, almost to himself. "He helped me build the company. He brought in half our biggest partners." His voice dropped. "And he did it with assets he stole from your father." "And let my father take the blame," Ava added. "Let everyone believe a good man was a failure, while he walked away clean and climbed straight to the top of your organization." Marcus lowered the memo. When he looked at her, his eyes were full of something she hadn't expected from him. Not anger at being challenged, not wounded pride. Shame. "I was misled," he said. "For years. by people I handed everything to. You will write about me, Ava. I assumed loyalty because it was convenient. I never looked closely because I never had a reason to. He shook his head slowly. Until you walked into my arena and gave me one. Ava took the memo back gently. This isn't proof of everything yet. One signature can be explained away by a good lawyer. We need to know how deep it goes, who else knew, where the money really went. She folded it carefully. If we move too soon, he buries it again, and this time he'll make sure there's nothing left to find. Then what do? We verify it, quietly, every piece, before we say a single word out loud. She met his eyes. Can you keep acting like nothing's wrong? Smile at him, shake his hand, pretend you don't know? Marcus's jaw tightened. It's the hardest thing you've ever asked me to do. But can you? He nodded once. For this? Yes. Down the corridor, a door opened. Trevor appeared, looking for Marcus, and the two of them stepped apart instantly, slipping their masks back on. But as Ava walked away, the folded memo tucked safely against her, she knew one thing for certain. The joke that started this was long behind them now. What came next was the truth, and a reckoning years overdue. They split up for Nashville. It was the only way to move fast without drawing attention. The semi-finals were 2 days away, and the executive, a polished, silver-haired man named Gregory Pierce, was sure to be watching both of them closely. If Ava and Marcus suddenly started traveling together, asking questions, pulling files, Pierce would know. So they agreed on a plan. Separate routes, separate contacts, everything verified twice, nothing said out loud until they had it all. Ava took the people from her father's past. Marcus took the people from inside his own company. Ava's first stop was a retired accountant named Linda Hayes, who had once kept the books for several of the businesses tangled up in the original merger. Harold had given Ava her name. Linda lived in a tidy apartment near the river and was reluctant to talk at first, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I always wondered if someone would come asking one day, Linda admitted. I've carried this a long time. Carried what? Ava asked gently. Linda took a slow breath. I was told to record certain transfers a specific way, move money through accounts, label it as routine, ask no questions. I needed the job. I had kids, so I did what I was told. Her eyes filled. But I knew it wasn't right. The numbers never matched the truth. When your father's company collapsed, I knew exactly why. I just couldn't prove it without ending my own life along with it. Who told you to do it? Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Gregory Pierce. Ava's heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. Would you be willing to say that again? On record? With documents to back it up? Linda hesitated for a long, painful moment. Then she stood, crossed to a closet, and pulled down a shoebox full of old papers and ledgers. I kept copies, she said, every page, in case the day ever came when telling the truth was safer than hiding it. She handed the box to Ava. Make it count. Marcus, meanwhile, was working the other end. He met quietly with a former assistant who'd left the company years ago under strange circumstances. The man had always claimed he was pushed out unfairly, and now Marcus understood why. The assistant had stumbled onto irregularities in Pierce's accounts and asked one question too many. Within a week, he'd been let go with a generous payout and a strict agreement never to discuss his time there. He paid me to disappear, the man told Marcus over coffee in a corner booth. I thought it was just office politics. I never imagined it went back that far, or that deep. Do you still have anything? Marcus asked. Emails, files, anything you took when you left? The man studied him carefully. If I give you this, there's no going back. Pierce protects himself. He always has. There's already no going back, Marcus said. I just need to know how far the lie goes. The man slid a small drive across the table. Then know all of it. That night, in a quiet hotel room far from the cameras, Ava and Marcus laid everything out side by side. Linda's ledgers, the drive's contents, Harold's old folder, the sealed archive memo. Piece by piece, the full picture finally took shape. It was worse than either of them had imagined. Gregory Pierce hadn't just sabotaged one business, he'd built an entire career on it.
Years ago, he'd identified small, successful companies, Daniel Mitchell's among them, manipulated their records, drained their value, and let their owners take the fall for crimes they never committed. He'd funneled the stolen assets through shell arrangements until they resurfaced, clean and untraceable, as the foundation of new ventures. And when a young, ambitious Marcus Kane had come along looking to build something big, Pierce had attached himself to the rising star, bringing his stolen empire with him. For years, Pierce had hidden behind Marcus's name and reputation. Every time something looked questionable, Marcus's success had washed it clean. The arrogant, untouchable promoter had been the perfect shield, and he'd never even known he was one. "He used me," Marcus said quietly, staring at the documents. "From the very beginning. My whole company is built partly on what he stole from people like your father." Ava watched him absorb it. She'd expected to feel satisfaction at seeing him brought low. Instead, she only felt the weight of how many lives one greedy man had quietly destroyed. "My father spent the rest of his life believing he'd failed," she said softly. "He thought it was his fault. He died thinking he wasn't good enough." Her voice caught. "He was the best man I ever knew, and Pierce let him die believing a lie." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and, hesitantly, placed a hand near hers on the table, not quite touching, but close. "We'll fix it," he said. "Not just for me, for your father, for Linda, for everyone he stepped on." Ava looked at him, surprised by the change in him. The man who'd mocked her in front of 100 cameras was gone. In his place sat someone humbled, someone who'd finally seen the cost of never looking too closely. "We have enough now," she said. "Documents, witnesses, records that connect every piece. A lawyer can't explain this away anymore. So when do we use it?" Ava thought of the championship, of the massive crowd that would be watching, of the marriage promise still hanging over everything like a punchline waiting to land. "At the final," she said, "everyone will be watching. Every camera, every reporter, the whole world that laughed at me. That's where the truth comes out, where Pierce can't bury it and no one can pretend they didn't hear it." "You're going to win first?" A small, fierce smile touched her lips. "I'm going to win first." Marcus almost smiled back. "And the promise? The marriage thing?" Ava gathered the documents carefully into a single folder. "You'll find out when everyone else does." The National Events Center in Dallas was unlike anything that had come before. Tens of thousands of seats filled to the brim. Bright lights swept across a massive central stage. Screens the size of buildings hung overhead, ready to broadcast every second to a watching world. The story that had begun as a careless joke at a press event months ago had become the most talked-about sports moment of the year, and at the heart of it stood Ava Mitchell. Backstage, she wrapped her hands in the quiet of her preparation room. Ethan sat nearby, healed now, watching his sister with open pride. In her gear bag, hidden beneath a towel, sat the folder. Everything they'd gathered, everything Pierce had spent years burying. "You don't have to do all of it tonight," Ethan said gently. "Win the match. We can deal with the rest later, somewhere safer." Ava shook her head. "There's no safer. The second Pierce realizes what we have, he'll make it disappear. Tonight, with the whole world watching, is the only place he can't." She tightened the last wrap. "Dad waited his whole life for someone to believe him. He's waited long enough." Ethan was quiet. Then he nodded. "Then go win." The final match was brutal. Her opponent was the reigning champion, a seasoned, decorated competitor who had dominated the tournament for years. From the first whistle, Ava knew she'd never faced anyone like this.
The champion was faster, more experienced, and completely unshaken by the moment. She pushed Ava harder than Renee had, harder than anyone. The first exchanges went badly. The champion scored early, controlling Ava, nearly ending the match in the opening minutes. The crowd held its breath. In her private box, Ava could feel the doubt creeping back into the watching faces, the same doubt that had followed her since the very first day. But Ava had spent her whole life being underestimated. She steadied herself. She stopped trying to match the champion's speed and went back to what had carried her through every round: patience, precision, reading her opponent. She absorbed the pressure. She studied the rhythm. She waited. The champion, sensing victory, grew bolder, and in that boldness, she left a gap. Ava took it. In one explosive sequence, she ducked under a committed grip, swept the champion off balance, and drove forward with everything she had. The champion crashed to the mat. Ava locked in control, every ounce of her strength and training holding firm as the seconds ticked down. The champion fought to escape, but Ava didn't let go. The whistle blew. For a heartbeat, the entire arena was silent. Then it exploded. Ava Mitchell, the woman they'd laughed at, the plus-size stranger they'd written off, the joke that went viral, had won the championship. Ethan was screaming from the floor. Strangers were on their feet. The screens overhead replayed the final throw again and again. It was the kind of moment people would talk about for years. And then the crowd remembered. A chant began, low at first, then growing, spreading section by section until it filled the building.
Marry her! Marry her! Marry her!
The cameras swung to Marcus Kane. He stood at the edge of the stage, microphone in hand, the spotlight finding him. This was the moment everyone had waited for. The arrogant promoter, forced to keep the ridiculous promise he'd made on camera all those months ago. The crowd roared, delighted, expecting a spectacle. Marcus lifted the microphone, but before he could speak, Ava walked toward him across the stage, breathing hard from the match, and held out her hand for the mic. Surprised, he gave it to her. The arena quieted, sensing something unexpected. "Months ago," Ava began, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the building. "This man stood in front of cameras and made me a promise. He said if I won, he'd marry me." She paused, and a hush fell. "And I let all of you believe that's why I was here. To win a husband. To prove a point." She turned slowly, taking in the massive crowd.
But that was never why I came.
She reached into a gear bag, lifted out the folder, and held it up. "I came for him," she said, and pointed across the stage to where Gregory Pierce sat in the front VIP row, his polished smile beginning to falter. Gregory Pierce, a man who, years ago, destroyed honest businesses for his own profit, who manipulated records, stole assets, and let good people take the blame for crimes they never committed. Her voice didn't waver. "One of those people was my father, Daniel Mitchell. He spent the rest of his life believing he'd failed. He died believing it. He didn't fail. He was robbed by the man sitting right there." A stunned murmur rolled through the crowd. Cameras whipped toward Pierce, whose face had gone white. "I have the records," Ava continued, holding the folder higher. "The forged contracts, the witnesses, the accounts that prove every word. This isn't a rumor, it's evidence. And it doesn't only clear my father's name, it shows how this man hid inside Mr. Kane's organization for years, using his reputation as a shield." She turned to Marcus. Marcus stepped forward, took the second microphone offered to him, and faced the crowd. His voice was heavy but firm. "Everything she just said is true," he announced. "I trusted the wrong people. I never looked closely because I never wanted to. But she made me look." He glanced at Ava. "And what we found will be turned over to the proper authorities tonight." Pierce shot to his feet, sputtering, but security was already moving toward him. The cameras caught all of it: the panic, the unraveling, the collapse of a man who'd hidden in the shadows for decades. The crowd was no longer chanting about marriage.
They were on their feet for an entirely different reason. Ava lowered the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, the same world that had laughed at her, now silent with respect.
"I didn't come here for a husband," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I came here for the truth." And she had won far more than a championship. 3 months later, the city of Denver wore the soft gold of early autumn. The mountains stood clear and sharp against the sky, and the air carried that crisp first hint of the season changing. On a quiet street near the heart of the city, a brand new building had just opened its doors, and a small crowd had gathered out front to celebrate. A banner stretched across the entrance read, "The Daniel Mitchell Athletic Center, for everybody at every age." Ava stood beneath it, looking up at her father's name, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Everything had changed since that night in Dallas.
The evidence she and Marcus had turned over had set off an investigation that moved quickly. Gregory Pierce had spent years believing he was untouchable, but the records left no room for his lawyers to maneuver. The forged contracts, Linda Hayes' testimony, the accounts that traced the stolen assets, all of it held. Pierce now faced serious legal consequences for financial misconduct stretching back decades. The businesses he'd destroyed were finally being recognized for what had been done to them, and her father's name had been cleared. It had been printed in every report covering the case. Daniel Mitchell had not failed. He had been robbed. The honest man who died believing he wasn't good enough was now remembered as exactly what he'd always been: a good man who'd been wronged. Ava had framed the article and hung it in her hallway at home, where she could see it every morning. Marcus had kept his word too. He'd torn his organization apart and rebuilt it from the inside. Everyone connected to the cover-up had been removed. He'd publicly returned what could be returned to the families harmed all those years ago, and he'd done it without cameras or fanfare, a quiet, genuine attempt to make right what he'd unknowingly helped hide. The arrogant promoter who'd once mocked a stranger to get a laugh had become something else entirely. With her prize money, Ava had done the only thing that felt right. She'd built a place, a training center for adults who'd given up on sports, people who'd been told they were too old, too big, too late, too unlikely. People like she had once been, who'd buried their gifts under the weight of life's demands. Here, none of that mattered. Here, anyone could walk through the door and rediscover what their body and spirit were capable of. It was everything her father had tried to build before it was stolen from him. Now, it carried his name. Ethan found her standing under the banner, still gazing up at it. He'd recovered fully and had been training again. This time alongside his sister, the two of them coaching the center's first group of members together. "You did it," he said quietly. "You actually did it."
We did it.
Ava corrected, slipping an arm around him.
Dad would have loved this.
"He'd have loved you," Ethan said. "You finished what he couldn't." Ava blinked back the sting in her eyes.
I just couldn't let it stay buried. He deserved better. They all did.
A familiar voice cut in behind them. "It's a beautiful building." They turned. Marcus Kane stood at the edge of the crowd, but not the Marcus the world had known. He wore simple clothes, no entourage, no glass box to hide behind. He'd come as a guest, an invitation Ava had been surprised to find herself sending. He held a small potted plant in his hands, looking almost sheepish. "A gift," he said, offering it. "For the front desk. I wasn't sure what you bring to something like this." Ava took it, a small smile tugging at her lips.
A plant, from the man who once compared me to a food court wanderer.
He winced. "I was hoping we'd never speak of that again."
Not a chance.
Ethan grinned and excused himself to greet the arriving members, leaving the two of them alone for a moment beneath the banner. Marcus looked up at the name above the door. "Daniel Mitchell," he read softly. "I wish I'd known him. I wish I'd known the truth a long time ago."
You know it now, Ava said. That's what matters.
He nodded, then looked at her, really looked at her, with something like wonder. You walked into my arena to put me in my place, and instead you tore the whole lie down. You changed everything. My company, my name, the way I see people. He paused. The way I see myself. You did the work too, Ava said. Most men in your position would have buried it to protect themselves. You didn't. That counts for something. A comfortable silence settled between them. Two people who had started as strangers throwing challenges across a crowded room and somehow become something neither of them had expected. Not the punchline the world had hoped for, something quieter and far more real.
So, Marcus said, a flicker of his old humor returning. I never did make good on that promise. Ava raised an eyebrow.
The marriage one?
That one. She laughed, a full, easy laugh.
I think we both know that promise was nonsense from the start.
It was, he agreed. Then, more seriously, but I'd like to keep showing up, as a guest, as someone who's earned it, if I can. No promises, no cameras, no jokes. Just starting over. Properly, this time. Ava considered him for a long moment. The arrogant man was gone. What stood in front of her was someone humbled, honest, and willing to begin again from the ground up.
You can start, she said, by helping me cut this ribbon.
She handed him one end of the oversized scissors. Together, in front of the small, cheering crowd, they cut the ribbon, and the doors of the Daniel Mitchell Athletic Center opened for the very first time. As the members streamed inside, full of hope and second chances, Ava looked up one last time at her father's name shining above the door. The challenge that had begun as a joke had cleared an innocent man's name, brought a hidden truth into the light, and changed two lives forever. Her father could finally rest. And Ava Mitchell, the woman the whole world had laughed at, had won the only thing she'd ever truly fought for: the truth.